Good afternoon, folks. My name is Victor Dover. I'm the CNU chair. This is the session on achieving sustainable communities at the large scale. We're going to focus on implementation of sustainable planning principles on a regional scale in South Florida in a project that's really just beginning, or beginning again, actually, after many years of coming into focus, and also on a citywide scale in one of America's largest cities, El Paso, Texas. So the common thread between these two places is that both of them are being looked at with a very wide lens, the citywide and regional scale. But there's another common thread, which is that both of these circumstances in planning came about as a result of a lot of direct and very substantial help from the federal government. And so, although the types of support are different, and I'll get into that in a second. Shelley Poticha from the Department of Housing and Urban Development will go last. Thank you, Shelley, and tie it all together with some information about the federal perspective. The first speaker will be Mike Busha. He's the executive director of the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council, famously called by Peter Katz in the early days of the New Urbanism the hippest planning agency in the nation. And they've worked. Do you remember that? I guess.
Yes, I do remember.
And they have worked very hard to hold on to that for all the years since, and I think actually achieved it. And Mike is going to talk to us about the 7 counties involved in the Southeast Florida 7 counties, 50 years vision, just getting underway, and he's going to do that with information about what has laid the groundwork for it in the Treasure Coast. Mathew McElroy from El Paso is the Deputy Director of Planning and Economic Development in the City of El Paso. That's your old title?
Old title.
What's the new title?
Director of City Development.
That's much shorter. Director of City Development. That is much better. And Mathew is an economist by training, but he works in municipal planning, and he does it like a basketball coach. I work for him. So you'll immediately know what I mean. And the best news of the day, which people outside this room hardly know unless they're watching Twitter in the last 5 minutes, is that this afternoon we learned that Mathew has just been elected a member of the CNU Board of Directors. The session was organized today by Marcella Camblor, who's here, and Rob Studeville from Better Cities and Towns. And it does come with AIA and AICP credits. So for AIA, you have to sign in the sheet at the back of the room. You have to write your name and your AIA number clearly, and you get 1.25 AIA continuing education credits. For AICP members, you report online, self-reporting at planning.org. You can search event number 19209, number 19209, for a list of all the sessions and tours from CNU 20 and select the ones that you attended for self-reporting on credential maintenance. Now, speakers, I will very nervously, since I work for all you people, very nervously tell you when we're getting running out of time. When Marcella says, "Go ahead, tell him he's running out of time," and then if we stay on, we'll have time for questions at the end. With that, welcome Michael Busha.
Thank you, Victor. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. My remarks are inspired today by, I guess, one of the brightest inventors of the late 19th and early 20th century. Thomas Edison said a couple things. A vision without execution is hallucination. You've all heard that before. And one important, I think, to all of us is good fortune is what happens when opportunity meets good planning. You could substitute good fortune with sustainable communities, I think. So I'll build the talk around that very quickly, since I have 14 minutes now. So. All of us, I don't know how many of us in this room have been involved in regional planning efforts, but I have been involved in many, some very successful and some not so successful, and I'd like to share some of those observations with you about why the ones that did so well, and why the ones that weren't so successful weren't so successful, and why, if we are successful with a regional plan, I think it will lead to achieving sustainable communities. I'll also briefly touch on an amazing opportunity that HUD, via Shelley Poticha, has recently afforded the regional planning councils, the South Florida Regional Planning Councils and Treasure Coast. This is a 7-county. You can kind of see it there. I won't spend much time on this. Right in here, from Indian River County all the way down almost to Cuba, to Key West. It's 295 miles long. It's about 100 miles longer than the state of New Jersey, but we have 7 counties, 121 cities. We're going to try and all bring them together to sing Kumbaya. And I will also just talk to you how we're going to marry this amazing opportunity that HUD has provided with some great planning, so we don't end up sort of, that was actually supposed to say hallucination. How does that happen? That was my big moment. Anyways, regional visions or hallucinations. So I'm going to get right off that. So, yeah, I hope. Oh, it's good. We're good. Just a quick history. Huh? No, this is fine. This is fine. I'm fine. The did you do that, Gene? Man, I worked so hard on that effect. All right. Anyways, look, history of regionalism in Florida is long, about 50 years, but the real heart of it, I guess the real synthesis of regionalism in Florida happened in 1972, actually 71. The Everglades were on fire. Broward was stealing water from Dade, or maybe it was vice versa. There were water wars between the two counties, Dade and Broward in the south. And Dade had decided it would be a great idea to build a giant jet port in the Everglades, but they didn't want to do it near them. They thought they would do it near Collier and Lee, and it created huge regional wars between 3 or 4 counties, including Palm Beach County just to the north. Governor Askew decided, look, I'm going to lock all you people in a room, and in 2 or 3 days, it ended up being a week, we're going to figure out how we can work together as a region. And out of that came the Comprehensive Planning Act, which we all love and hate, some of us, but also 186, which created regional planning councils. There's 11 of us statewide. There's full coverage. It's a requirement to have one. How the counties support them, that varies across the state. How well they perform also varies across the state. And I'm asked a lot, well, what's regionalism, Mike? And some people suggest that because everybody has a different idea about what regionalism is and what regional planning is. Some people think it's Portland Metro with a $60–80 million budget. They actually get into land use, things like that. It's a very comprehensive, on-the-ground, physical planning organization. Some people think it was Everglades restoration, that the South Florida Water Management District getting 16 counties to agree to fix the Everglades and then to pay for that. That was regional planning, and it's often overlooked as one of the best examples of regional planning in the state of Florida and in the country. So, cooperation on economic development, let's get those guys talking and quit stealing clients from us. Florida's Bio-Life Science Initiatives, $1 billion between Orlando and Miami to bring bioscience and life sciences to Southeast Florida. Some people think it's a code word for rural today, gone tomorrow, and I'll get to that in a minute. Other folks suggest that it means big, and that's not a hallucination. That's the second largest McDonald's, actually, in the world. It's on Ohio Street in Chicago. We've been surpassed by China also. They have a much larger McDonald's in China. So that's not regionalism, but that's what some people. So why regional planning and visioning? Should we do it because everybody else is doing it? Frankly, I think we're hyper visioning and hyper planning across the state. Everybody is doing it, trying anyways to figure it all out. The best thing that could happen is that these visions actually all get knitted together, and then finally the state, because I think the Constitution requires it, in fact I know the Constitution requires it, that the state of Florida actually has a plan for business. They actually have a plan to budget. We don't have one of those today. Budgeting and planning get done in other ways, like sausage. So here's why. It's where the action is, it's where the money is. I'm not going to read these things to you, but that's really where most of the innovation, that's where most of the gross domestic product is occurring. Most of everything is occurring in those 12 regions. Another reason, because the private sector, the people who are investing outside the public realm, are watching and listening and paying very close attention to those cities and counties and regions that are not making them guess about which way a region or a city or a town want to go. The other reason, because competition. This was written not so long ago by our friends in the Orlando, which is actually called the Orlampa region now, because Orlando, Tampa, kind of across the center of the state, and Cocoa are getting together, so we're calling it the Orlampa region. Forget South Florida. Central Florida is poised to become the state's economic center. The empire is crumbling. South Florida is becoming our Rust Belt. Growth is its factory, and the factory is closing down for a long time. I mean, that may be true. Well, nobody likes to read that about their own region, so truth hurts. But there is great competition out there among the regions, the metro areas, and even smaller metro areas. So we need to do better and build a better address and be more, I think, competitive with what's going on. Now, regional planning isn't anything new, but what is new, and Shelley will get into this later, is that there's at least 3 federal agencies, maybe more, Shelley, or maybe less, I don't know, talking to each other, all right, about how to align their funding streams, how to align their programs to actually help regions and cities and towns be more competitive, be more resilient with their economy. And that would be the EPA, Department of Environmental Protection, Department of Transportation, and also the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development. Those 3 agencies, this is landmark, and it's interesting. One of our own is actually very, very involved in HUD, and that's the reason why I think this program, the Sustainable Communities Initiative, is moving forward. Southeast Florida was one of the lucky ones, one of the most fortunate ones, in fact, to receive that amount of money over the next 3 years. And I think what it means to me, this opportunity is amazing to me, because what it will do, there are 2 questions that have always troubled, I think, this region, and this will give us the opportunity. This is why Southeast Florida, we're big. There's a lot of horsepower down here, and there's going to be a lot of growth in this region. The feds thought it was very important to get this region in order. Again, this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to get everybody in the region rowing and growing in the same direction, it's huge for us. And I use the word rowing with a tongue-in-cheek, because sea level rise, if you listen to Jonathan Barnett and anybody else, I don't care why sea level is rising, but in fact it is rising. And in fact, in Key West, they're making improvements to their drainage and raising roads, because I don't think it's just the rain, because we haven't had much in 5 months except for the last couple of days here. But we need to figure that out, and that is one of the issues that the group down here, the 7 counties, had decided to address. But anyways, this opportunity is huge for us. 2 questions again. This messy question, how by 2060, how will the next 5 million people coming to live in the Southeast Florida landscape be organized and settled? Now, there aren't any answers in the state plan, and the local comprehensive plans don't have the answers either. They need to be dusted off. We're going to hopefully, with the regional plan, begin to get the conversation started about how to do that and what this place in the next 50 or 60 years needs to do to accommodate gracefully those additional residents. The other one is really important for South Florida. Again, to position the region to be as competitive as possible in this changing economy. Very important question. Let me just go back to that really quick. South Florida has a history, and a very good history, really, of growing its economy, but it's very limited in where it's growing. I mean, we have made a living off of selling land back and forth to each other, selling cheeseburgers and sweaters to each other, and agriculture. And when any of those go down, the tourism economy, the housing boom went bust, it really deeply affects Southeast Florida, more than most places in the country. And we are reeling from that, and we'll probably be the last to recover from that because our economy is so limited. I think what the HUD initiative will do, if we do this right, it will give us an opportunity to diversify and make our economy more resilient, and that's very important for South Floridians, especially if we're going to be attractive. A colleague of mine, a mentor of mine, actually said about regional planning, you got one chance at this, so don't screw it up, because there is a huge ebb and flow in how elected officials, state officials, other officials feel about regional planning. So I'm going to be very quick about this. We have done what I believe is a very, very good regional plan based on the charters of the new urbanism. We went through a very long process of education with the elected officials to completely shift how we do regional planning from the way we used to do it behind our desk, policy after policy, regulating all the wrong things, to a completely different form. Again, adopting the charter and adopting a vision that, in fact, everybody got behind and adopted that back in 1995. It's now state law and it's state rule for the Treasure Coast region. A couple things real quickly. Achieving success. How do you do this? How do you make sure that these plans don't just sit on a shelf, that people believe in them? I'm going to go through a few lessons learned here very quickly. Probably the most important, and it's one thing I don't think the federal government can reach down and really make a region do where these grants have been issued. I know there was some sentiment to try that, and I don't think it went very well, but we need to police ourselves down here. We talk about regions as almost if they're a development. I mean, people don't understand the scale. Each one of those dots up there, you could probably fit 3 Manhattans inside of them. Yet we don't really explain that when we're working with citizens, the scale of things when you begin placing dots. This one's called the chip game, whether it's the Legos or the dots. It's very important what happens underneath them, and we get a sort of a handle on scale. What I think happens, and what I know happens a lot of times with these what happens a lot of times is we have all the same sorts of ideas. We want greenways, we want to be connected, we want nodes, we want more compact development, we want to make sure our water supply is protected, and everything else you can think of that represents, in a lot of folks' minds, good planning, represents security to them, represents a good economy. Well, if you stop here, because everybody has such a different idea about what happens, what mixed use means, what new urbanism means, some people think mixed use is an office park next to a Walmart, next to a housing subdivision. Other people think it's in one building. Other people think, like Leon Creer, that it is an organic city. So we got to get that straightened out. I would suggest to you that regional planning without urban design is some of the worst medicine you will ever see, because good regional planning without good urban design is dangerously unpredictable. Some people think this is compact, other people think this is compact. This happens to be Houston. Yeah, that's a nice city. This happens to be San Francisco. The thing with regional planning is we never get to that point. We always stop. At least in this state, we always seem to stop with the blobs. And until you get to this level of detail, it's very difficult to get agreement and get the cities and towns interested in what you're doing because it's not defined. And then you'll get a very unpredictable result as well. And the way to, I think, combat that is to, hire a great team. If you get an opportunity to do this, like I said, you get one chance at this. Don't screw it up. Get the best people you can to help you do this and do the heavy lifting for you. Victor put together, Dover, Kohl and Associates had put together probably the best, strongest consulting team for regional planning we've ever seen. So, and we're very happy to be working with them. So over the next couple of years, we're going to deliver, I think, in a very big way. Show me the money. A vision without execution is hallucination. Cost feasible plan. There's got to be an inventory of the once you decide on the vision, there's got to be an infrastructure plan that suggests how you're going to pay for all this. What are the things you need to change in your infrastructure or add to the infrastructure to make things feasible? This will be very tangible evidence for local elected officials and provide great instructions for them as well as the business community to get together on the pieces of infrastructure that will accomplish the vision. And that will come out of the planning effort. But if you don't quantify it and qualify it a little bit, no one will know what the next step is. Who cares about what happens in 2060? Not many. I mean, we're kind of a generation that worries about how we're going to make out tomorrow. So I would suggest to you, if you're doing a 50-year plan, include a 5-year action component. Something that's tangible, again, that you will, in fact, over the next 5 years, here are the things we're absolutely going to accomplish. Measuring your success. That's certainly one more thing that we've always said. How do we know? How do we know if we're rowing in the right direction or accomplishing our goals? Going through this very quickly. a leadership component. I can't tell you how important it is, because when you do a regional plan, it's not the regional. Most of these regional plans don't have any regulatory authority at all. And, oh, I'm sorry. And unless you in fact have the leadership educated and involved in these plans, you won't accomplish it. They have to own it. It's something I'm telling you something I'm sure you already know, but if they don't own it, you're not going to implement it. It'll sit there, because again, a lot of these regional plans are not tied to regulatory authorities, and we're counting on the local governments to say, hey, this is a great idea, we're going to start changing our own plans and policies. Involve everyone, don't be afraid. This effort we're undertaking in Southeast Florida, we're just sort of beginning it, involves at least 200 public and private partners, as well as about 175 local governments. It's a big task, but that's something that I think is absolutely important. Of course, if they don't own it, if they're not involved, if they don't think it was their idea, it won't be implemented. Also, I would suggest, if you are doing one of these regional plans, some adult supervision. It's very important. You know, we all don't get along in a region this big. There's always going to be some gnashing of teeth and some disagreements. And again, another way to get the elected officials and the business folks involved is get them involved in actually shaping the plan, understanding what the budget is, understanding what the working and moving parts are. So some adult supervision is very helpful across the board as a committee. I know I, for one, never liked committees, but it's the only way the regional plan in 1995 got approved. Because if it wasn't for them working with us, owning the plan, and I'll tell you a story, quick story. The plan that we did, the regional plan, which turned sort of the world upside down in the Treasure Coast region in '95, was done in 15 minutes at the board. And it wasn't because the staff made a great argument. It's because the 8 or 10 board members that were involved, they sold the plan for us. Okay, so that's very important. Whoops. So I guess at this point, regionalism redefined. There was a few things that we've learned along the way, and again, I can't thank HUD and EPA and DOT enough for allowing us to try this one more time on a much larger scale, because, as I said, you usually don't get that chance. And thank you, and stay tuned. We'll have something, hopefully, by Buffalo, 2014, to present a finished product. So thank you. Thank you very much.
A question for Mike while I get Matthew's images up.
Question? I must have hit everything.
Come on, come on, come on. What do the two colors mean on that long list of committee members? Is this it here, Mathew?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah, we'll be all right with that. Okay, take it away. Mathew McElroy.
I think that what I'll do is tell you a little bit of a story in terms of how it is our whole planning effort went. And I think that if I tell it that way, some of the lessons might come out a little bit better. If you're not familiar with El Paso, Texas is at the very tip of Texas. It's a county of about 830,000 people. Roughly 82–83% of those people live within the city of El Paso. The city of El Paso is also home to Fort Bliss, Texas, which is really where this story starts. In the 2005 BRAC round, it was announced that Fort Bliss, Texas was going to be the biggest winner of troops in the Army, and the projection at that point is that there would be 28,000 new troops coming to Fort Bliss. When you get 28,000 new troops, that doesn't just mean new troops, it means family members, and that means you got to build schools, and that means you got to build housing on post, except that the Army said, by the way, we're only going to build about 2,700 units on post. Everybody else has to live outside the gate, and so that means you got to build a lot of housing. So when that happened, the city of El Paso, there's a whole sort of consulting industry built around BRAC. It's interesting if you go to one of the Association of Defense Community conferences, you'll see all of the sort of consultants that are gathered around doing those kinds of studies. But so at our first round at planning, we did a regional growth management plan using SAIC. And one of the top recommendation that came out of that particular study was that the city's comprehensive plan was ill-suited for periods of rapid growth and was already badly out of date. And by the way, your subdivision and zoning codes are not particularly useful given this period that you're going to be seeing over the next few years. And so at that point, we decided that even though we knew it was going to be unpopular, and I'll tell you a little bit about that here in a second, we needed to go out and get a new comprehensive plan. And ideologically, we also wanted to get a new urbanist comprehensive plan. And so when the RFQ came out, we were very careful to send it only to firms like Kohl and DPZ and those kinds of firms. And we were lucky enough that Kohl decided to respond. Like what you saw in the Treasure Coast presentation just a second ago, Kohl and Partners put together a fantastic team. Before I came to the city of El Paso, I actually worked at a place at the University of Texas El Paso called the Institute for Policy and Economic Development. And over the 10 years that I worked there, I worked with lots of different planning firms, lots of different firms that did economic forecasting, economic impact studies. The team that Kohl put together was the best one that I had ever worked with. And you can tell by the folks that they had, it was all the superstars in the new urbanism and the best people that they could get in Texas. So here's the part about El Paso, Texas that, like many cities in the West, El Paso, Texas has almost exclusively grown outward, meaning everything that you hear about suburban sprawl, if you drive into far east El Paso or far west El Paso, that is what is happening in that particular area. And one of the big ideas that we came at this with was that we understood, at least in the planning department, because that idea hadn't gotten out of the planning department into the local development community, was that we couldn't continue to grow that way with nothing but a constant outward push, that we really needed to focus our development back on the city's downtown, because the downtown was also in terrible shape. There was nobody living downtown. Frankly, after 2:30 in the afternoon, everything was closed because the lunch run was done. And so our comprehensive plan, when we started scoping it out after we selected Kohl and Partners, we said we told Kohl and Partners, because the Department of Defense Office of Economic Adjustment has been kind enough to give us a bunch of money to do this. We want everything that a comprehensive plan should have. We really want a state-of-the-art comprehensive plan with as much public participation as you can get. And so these were actually the comprehensive plan components. And you'll see everything that you typically see in a comprehensive plan. There were some really neat new things, like there's a fantastic health chapter in there that really got a lot of the stakeholders who otherwise would not have participated, like the Paso del Norte Health Foundation, to participate in it. But to keep OEA happy, you can see that or Department of Defense OEA happy, you'll see that there's also a chapter on Fort Bliss at the end. Critical to our regional planning, but not something that you would typically see in a comprehensive plan. And these are the big ideas. Everybody's familiar with this stuff as part of the new urbanism. The plan itself turned out fantastic. We ended up we've won a couple of awards at this point because of the team that Kohl put together for us. And they did that because of all the things that you hear about that you should do as part of a regional plan. The public participation process was absolutely huge. We had charrettes all over town where hundreds of people showed up. We used MindMixer online. We had open design studios that were open for weeks at a time so that people could come in and draw with the different architects that were in town. We also did all of the stakeholder meetings. So we did the charrette process, but I think by the time we were done with the stakeholder meetings, we actually ended up at over 170 by the time the comprehensive plan was adopted. So given and I'll tell you a little bit about the political situation in a second, we had close to 3,000 people actually put hands on the plan between all of the different charrettes that we had and all of the people who came in to the design studio. And so the thing that was interesting, and here's a part where El Paso is difficult. El Paso has a very strong National Association of Home Builders local group. And so when you talk about infill, when you talk about downtown revitalization, that cuts the number of units that they're typically used to doing at the fringe of the city. If they're typically used to doing 3,000 units a year, and they've been doing 3,000 units a year, and suddenly you put 1,500 of those downtown, or it's just not the same sort of model, and it's difficult for them to adjust to. And so one of the things that the team was really good about doing was working with everybody in the development community, whether they were single-family home developers or commercial developers, and really trying to educate them about what this comprehensive plan meant, what this different kind of development was. Oh. And the other thing that, as a lesson, as part of doing regional plans, is set up a really diverse advisory board. I think this is one of the big lessons that had. Because we thought about whether or not we could do this with just the stakeholder meetings, with just the charrettes, and not have a stakeholder board, because there were so many people to keep happy. Because at some point the board can get so large that it's by the time you're done you got 100 people on it, nobody agrees on everything, and then you're at gridlock. But this is the group that actually ended up on it, and I think ultimately was a large part of the reason that the plan got passed. Because when everything blew up in the last 30 days, we were able to say, no, wait a second, you've been on this board for 2 years, and now you're trying to stop the whole thing. Where were you 6 months ago? But everybody from the Home Builders Association to the Greater Chamber to you name it, the local AIA, the local chapter of engineers. I'll go through all of that stuff. So design in public. So in terms of regional planning in El Paso, the new urbanism is really, really different, not only in the West, but really, really, really different in El Paso. And so one of the things that people needed to see, because they're used to the Super Target and the Walmart and single-family detached subdivisions, and even the traditional neighborhoods that we had in the traditional core of the city, so much of the commercial fabric had changed. Even a lot of that had become sort of strip center, so people weren't used to what this different product was. They knew they visited that place on vacation, and they liked it, but they didn't know that they could have that too. And so one of the things that was really neat about what Dover Kohl did was they picked areas all over town to show what those places would look like if they were redeveloped as grayfield sites or as suburban retrofit projects. And they did visual preference surveys to show people, here's what your subdivision looks like, and here's what the commercial strip looks like. Do you like that, or do you like this old part of the exact same region that just happens to be built was built a long time ago, but could be rebuilt again, say, under the SMART code, for example. And regardless of the visual preference survey you'll look at, you'll see the traditional building type, 80–90% acceptance, and the people and the homes that people were buying at that moment, 20 and 30%. And so you could see that there was a real interest in that other kind of product. And the part about this that worked was because they were successful in drawing all of town, not just little bits and pieces. It was much easier for them to accept, because nobody felt like they were being left out. So not only did we have all of that public participation, they drew everywhere, so everybody felt like they were part of the plan. Their neighborhood was getting drawn. It's not just a particular part of town. And so one of the really neat things that they did, and I'll go through these fast, because the product didn't exist in El Paso, they did a great job of drawing these different places. And so one of our entertainment district is Cincinnati. It's right by UTEP. And this is our university area. And you can see from the aerial that even though it should really be a mixed-use walkable area, and some of it is street-oriented, you can see there on Cincinnati Avenue, a lot of the rest has gone to strip center over time. So they showed people what that area could look like, because people really like Cincinnati Street, except it's only a block and a half long. And so how do you get back to all of Cincinnati Street being a real university area where the whole thing is walkable? You park once and you can spend the whole day there if you want to. And so they did that with these kinds of drawings and these kinds of renderings. And so you start showing people pictures like that, and they can see that, oh, there's a product type that I don't have. These sorts of things they bought into immediately. They did the same thing for downtown, filling in all of the empty the blocks that were either empty or where buildings were in the wrong places. And this is the downtown that I talked about earlier, where 2:30 in the afternoon and it pretty much clears out. and showing people what reinvestment in downtown looks like. This is our historic park downtown, historic plaza downtown. Actually, let me go back one. The other thing that Dover Kohl was really helpful in, that a lot of people don't know about, is we actually had a landscape urbanist firm, probably the best way to describe them, do the first run of design at this park. And it looked nothing like anything that belonged in a downtown. It was like somebody had dragged what's called an arroyo through the middle of downtown. And it was, I mean, great. I kind of got the vision of what they were going for, but you know, it was completely out of context given that the park was framed by 3 historic buildings. And so one of the best things that came out of the whole project was that through sort of the third-party critique of that initial design, we've gotten to a design that's much more like this, and it's a place that sits much better in terms of its context. Things like this is our Burnham building. Where that park is shown right now is actually a parking lot, and then up there, while it's turning into an entertainment district, people didn't get that, oh, you could put a park there. Turns out there used to be a park there, and the whole space changes if you just put a park back in front of this fantastic building. They also, one of the other things that they showed us is that this is the park that we currently required to be built under the subdivision ordinance. If there's a corner that's left over or you know, a sort of fragment piece of land, this is what the developer would build by default. And one of the things that they showed us is, well, you can change your parkland dedication requirement and design standards and you can get better parks. Same thing for new neighborhoods. Our conventional subdivision and zoning code, Builders Association was happy with, local developers were happy with, but what we were able to do in terms of our reforms was update that to show people that our zoning code and subdivision code are broken, and we can adopt new standards so that if you want to, not that you have to, if you want to, you can build mixed-use neighborhoods, varying lot types, different park typologies that we didn't allow. This is another example. This particular street is actually a requirement, or was a requirement in our subdivision code. Houses could not face onto these minor arterial streets. And you can see that makes no sense because you sort of create these dead places, and I think they actually photoshopped that person in. That's not a real person. And I think, well, I mean, I don't know how long the poor photographer had to be out there to wait for somebody to come by, but I think that, yeah. So they actually added that person in, but. So once they started showing the pictures of, you know, here's what you require when you could require a little bit of landscaping, when you could turn the houses back on the street, and allow on-street parking, it really becomes a whole different place. We required the other, but what we kept saying, at least in rhetoric, was we wanted this, but if somebody came in with it, we wouldn't approve it. And then same thing with the BRT. Everybody's seen that picture, and one of the things that was one of the big parts of the plan was that we wanted to make sure we had areas of density around our new BRT system, and that was a diagram that was helpful in that. And so they were doing an East Side TOD, Northgate TOD, which is another one. These are just some diagrams. We're doing a Mission Valley TOD. We're actually doing the rezoning for that with Dover Kohl right now. And the pictures were always helpful, and when you take these pictures out to the public with all the renderings, they sort of get it. And then they also talked about opportunity sites. That's the rail yard that sits right by our interstate. And then when they talk about BRT and people say, well, I don't want to ride the bus, and you talk about it as a different kind of product, and it's not density everywhere, it's density at these particular places where you see the purple dots, they kind of get, it's much easier for them to understand in a place where that product doesn't exist. This I'll run through real quick. This is the sort of last big piece of it was the future land use map. The future land use map, at least in Texas, is really where you get your real authority from. That's where you say, when a new zoning case comes in, here's the kind of land use that I'm going to approve. And so, but to do that, though, we had to deal with the official zoning map and how that official zoning map interacted with the future land use map. And they did this through a set of open space categories and through a set of growth categories. And so these were the open space ones, things that would be set aside forever, all the way through '07, where we knew that at some point, as the city continued to grow, would be necessary for development. And you can see how these build out with the '01 preserve, agricultural, military, remote, potential annexation, urban expansion, and then so all of the open space sectors that through one way or another we wanted to protect. And so depending on what zoning case came in, because in West Texas you get really big zoning cases, particularly on the edge of the city, this finally gave us a tool that we didn't have to evaluate those. And then same thing with the growth sectors. That map I showed you earlier where everything happened on the fringe of the city, now we have a tool in the comprehensive plan that we can apply to actual zoning cases that says whether or not that zoning case should be approved. And so first, grow first downtown, make it easiest and fastest and cheapest to grow first downtown, and we're actually getting the incentives for that in place within the next 30 days. Grow second in your traditional neighborhood core, third post-war, and then, actually let me go back here. This is where the suburban stuff is going to stay. You're not going to go back and rebuild streets and all of that, but this gave some level of comfort to the development community that we weren't going to change all the development codes. They're going to need to change over time, and they're going to continue to need to make. They're going to need to continue to make money, so you can't take that away from them. We didn't want anybody to go out of business because they don't understand this stuff. And then just the other areas: rural settlement, industrial, Fort Bliss mixed use. Our military installation is actually selling that huge piece of land, and so we're requiring them to zone under the smart code before they annex to the city because they can't get service without it. And so that's all the growth sectors, and then all the growth sectors and the open space sectors. So what's happened since then as part of that story? The regional planning is good, do the public participation, do all of that, but as part of what we've done, we had almost no CNU members 2.5 years ago. We've got 150 today. 2.5 years ago, we didn't have anybody who'd passed the CNU-A exam. Today, when this exam period closes, I think we'll have over 150. As part of that effort also, you have to, if you're going to do work for the city as part of any capital project, and we have an supposedly an $800 million bond coming up, you have to have a CNU-A assigned professional to be able to even compete for the city's capital work. It's going to end up being 2,000 acres of smart code, ITE, walkable urban thoroughfares manual required for all capital projects. So you name it. Plus we updated the zoning code, updated the subdivision code, updated the landscape code so you get bonuses for street-oriented buildings. So everything that we could do, we've tried to do in short order because the regional plan has to get out of the planning office, has to get on the books, or you're never going to see any change. And that's it.
You want to take a couple of questions?
Sure.
Beautiful.
See if anything's burning. You want to jump on in Shelley's stuff? Anybody have a clarification they want from Mathew? Okay, let's do this. Now, for those who are newer to CNU, you may not realize this, but much of the armature or framework of the new urbanist thought, especially at the scale of the region, came from Shelley when she worked at Calthorpe Associates, and then she went on from there to become the executive director of the Congress for the New Urbanism. And for years, during our most important growth period and maturing period for this organization, she was in charge. So this is like the prodigal daughter comes home here, or a sister anyway. And so Shelley, since then, has had a number of interests. I'll let her tell you about them. Welcome, Shelley Poticha. I can bring up your PDF. Go ahead and start.
Okay.
Here you go.
Hey, so I brought a presentation, but I just want to use it to riff, because it's something that I'm showing people around the country, and for this group, it's a little basic. But
We agree with that, right?
yeah, of course. So maybe it could go in the view mode, right? How do you do that on this one?
You want to pick a certain slide?
No, I just want you to just show the thing in full screen. Show that guy. Yeah. Okay. So, you know, it's been really fantastic being at CNU I actually got to come for 3 days. And that is remarkable for me. Right now, given what I'm doing and working in the federal government, you just don't have control of your life. So being able to do this has been incredible, and it has. This is number 20. So I'm just reflecting so much on the conversations that we had at the beginning, and the middle, and now, and seeing the.
Did it again.
Let me try this. Do not show this message again. Oh, I think that might.
That might do it. Okay.
Thank you.
Except it's got this other little crap in there. So, where was I?
It's a great presentation.
Okay.
So far, Shelley.
Don't worry. Okay. So like one theme that I have been really dwelling on, both in this job that I have and also through this Congress, is how transformative this whole movement actually has been, evidenced by the fact that we have the city of El Paso taking this on in the most, top to bottom kind of way, and implementing all these ideas that we have been talking about at different points for all these years. And so I guess one kind of takeaway I have from the Congress is that we're starting to really see a tremendous amount of momentum. And I know that it is really hard to understand that when you are, in the middle of a recession and you are trying to continue your work, or you are in a community meeting and you have nutcases going after you, questioning everything. But you know what? Stepping back, I just have this amazing position right now to see at this scale how phenomenally widespread the ideas that we have been talking about are finally getting pickup. And so right now I work for Secretary Sean Donovan, a gentleman who grew up in Manhattan, is completely an urbanite, has a whole background in development finance, and he's now the Secretary of the Department of Housing and Urban Development. And when we first got together and I was brought in, I took him on a little tour of a few places in the U.S. And he had never understood how exciting the topics that we talk about at the Congress are to people in communities, and that the notion that urbanism is so fundamental to our well-being and our economic stability and our participation in civic life. That was quite a revelation. And so he began to work with me and really kind of started leading in this, an area that he had not really been particularly well versed in, but knew intuitively, being a guy from Manhattan. And I thought that one thing that has really helped us tremendously is understanding that and appreciating that the federal government is not actually very good at inserting itself into communities. And we hear over and over again about how, maybe we actually don't need the federal government to be involved. And what I have learned so far is that part of what we need to do is reframe the partnership with communities, so that the federal government can actually be a helper, be an assistant, but not the driver behind the quality of places that we're trying to make. And that is, a huge reversal from the old days. Stephanos Palazoidis and I were talking about the legacy of urban renewal, and that just thinking, a generation ago we were talking about clean slate in communities, and here we're talking about letting communities lead and deciding what their end goals should be. and having the federal government be a support to that rather than, either driving the show or dictating exactly how money should be used. And so many of you have probably already heard me talk about this partnership, and Mike mentioned it. We're just about coming up on our 3-year anniversary, and I'll talk a little bit more about some of the things I think we've accomplished, but one thing that I wanted to address here at the Congress is the kind of alignment between the Charter of the New Urbanism and these partnership livability principles. Because you look at these partnership livability principles and they are very simple. They are mom and apple pie. In fact, we have done polling and we found out that all demographic profiles and virtually all political inclinations love these principles. They think they are great. They are a device for different federal agencies to be able to work together and to promote a sense that all of us ought to be working toward a common set of objectives. It is much more about linking hands and arms than anything else. It relates to the Charter of the New Urbanism because I actually don't think that you can achieve these goals without urbanism and attention to urban design. But one of the things that Victor and I have spoken about is that we as the federal government are not going to be able to say, go out and do urban design. Go out and look at your land use codes and do this kind of land use pattern. The federal government actually does not have any standing in that arena. And so we are using these principles to guide a conversation, to help bring people together, to educate people in our communities. And I think the end goal is going to be very similar to what we talk about in the Charter of the New Urbanism, but without being as specific as the Charter is. So it's been an amazing almost 3 years trying to work in this bureaucracy, really, to help implement those principles. The notion that we ought to be thinking about places, not just funding streams, is a huge, mind shift for the federal government. And so part of what we've done here is that we have a core partnership, HUD, DOT, and EPA. We're reaching out beyond that to other federal agencies, including, I might say, the Department of Defense. But here we have Agriculture, Economic Development Administration, Health and Human Services, FEMA, Department of Energy, National Endowment for the Arts. They're all starting to get integrated into the notion that we need to be much more aligned and coordinated with our investments. And so these are just, the beginning of a list of contributions from different federal agencies that are all about either planning for investment in communities or building those communities. And as we try to work together, learn about what these programs can and cannot do, we're trying to make it possible for people in communities to kind of see a pathway to implement the visions that Mike was talking about and we were hearing in El Paso, Mathew was talking about. So again, we can understand that actually there are substantial resources at the federal level that we ought to grab onto and try and steer toward the kinds of things that deliver great places. Right now, if you are someone at the local level, you pretty much have to be a genius to figure this stuff out. It's not written down very much. It's not identified in a manual. And so part of what this partnership is trying to do is to show where we can begin to grab resources to be able to support the work that communities are trying to do. So over the last 3 years, my office, the Office of Sustainable Housing and Communities, has had 2 years worth of grant competitions that we've run. We've invested $250 million in urban planning in the U.S. That's a lot of money. This is just 1 year's worth, representing both the funding that comes from my office, but all those little dots are investments from DOT, EPA, and HUD. It's about $800, $900 million a year. These are the funds that build the streets, that clean up the brownfields, that build your water infrastructure, that help support housing. And this is a fraction of what the federal government is investing in communities right now. Now, the other thing I want to kind of point out here is that this initiative has touched 50 states. It has touched places that are not the usual suspects in terms of, thinking about new urbanism or sustainable communities. And that brings both amazing opportunity but also some real challenges. The opportunity, I think, is that it shows that there is just a tremendous groundswell of interest in the kind of work that we have been talking about now for 20 years. In my program, we have only been able to fund 11% of the applications. So, demand is way bigger than our ability to do this. The challenge is that we've got very uneven capacity actually to do this work. And so this is actually a charge I would have for the new urbanists, which is, okay, we're now at scale. We are not boutique. This is quite mainstream. And we need to figure out how we're going to lift up the folks who came into this with energy and enthusiasm, but maybe actually don't entirely know how to do that. And so, part of what we've been talking about at the Congress is some of that. And that's going to continue as we get the tools together. But again, I just want to point out, this is so widespread. This is just 1 year. And so I've been sort of trying to kind of understand and quantify the implications of this. And one of the things I was looking at was, okay, so say the people that live in these communities drove 1 less mile a day. Not a big, giant goal. 1 less mile a day per household. I'm not even talking about per person, per household. We would be saving about 14 billion gallons of gas a year. And if we just took maybe, let's just be conservative, about 1/3 of the money that we're saving from gas costs, and that money got recirculated into the local economy, we would be infusing about $6 billion a year into our communities. So that's not insignificant. And that's just a little tiny fraction of the potential implications. That's just that one part, saving money on gas costs. And so, you know, these are the kinds of metrics that I think we ought to be really trying to focus on as we talk to people in communities, that it really is a prosperity strategy. It really is a tool to revive our communities, to support local businesses, to support entrepreneurs when we build in a pattern that makes it possible for people to drive less and save money. So I just want to show briefly these sort of bulleted slides, because I think that it's important to understand that the 187 grantees that run through my office, through the Sustainable Communities Initiative, are doing a lot of different things. And we're cataloging this, we're putting together information so that all of you can learn from it. But, you know, here we have like transportation. Remember, HUD is not a transportation agency, but we are funding a whole bunch of transportation planning. All the way down, I would notice there's a bunch of stuff on here that is pretty common in the CNU lexicon, codes and corridor plans. In fact, I want to mention the Ranson, West Virginia plan, which I think was presented in another session, a corridor plan connecting two cities. These guys are mind-blowingly great. We're also funding land acquisition in advance of transit being built in a community, which there actually are no other sources of federal monies that allow you to go out and purchase property in order to get control of land so that the community can really determine what is the best use for that property, rather than having to entirely work within the constraints of a hyper-accelerated market. A huge focus on economic development. And I think that, you know, our constraints, particularly given the national conversation about the recession, are forcing a conversation to understand how place really drives economic resilience. And many of the places that we're funding are actually using our funds to figure out how to diversify their economies. In the same way that Mike talked about how, you know, South Florida's economy just has, you know, like a couple big sectors that it focuses on. That is not sustainable. And so we've got to figure out how we reframe that. We're looking a lot at you know, how to catalyze private investment. I think that one of the huge challenges is that, you know, again, the federal government is going to be a partner, but we are not going to be able to pay for the whole thing. I cannot tell you how many people assume that there is a pot of gold that is going to pay for their urban development project once they've got the plan together. The private sector has to do this. We can use our funding and the kind of collective public investment way more strategically, and that's what we ought to be thinking about. And then, you know, everything at CNU is so much about how we engage people in the public, and Mathew mentioned, you know, quite eloquently about that. We require that in order to get our funding, you kind of have to stand up and say, we're going to do extensive community engagement. We're going to partner with public and nonprofit and private sector interests. You actually, unfortunately, you can't get money from this program unless you work in partnership. And you're going to come forward with implementable plans and strategies. It is not just a picture. As Mike was saying, it's got to have all those implementation tools as part of it. And so when I talk to people, you know, who are just learning about this movement, part of what I am trying to impress is that we are at a place where we have to be far more focused on long-standing resilient economies, and there are many ways of doing this. One of our grantees is Sacramento region in California. Their work with the Metro Chamber to put together a real urban and rural ag program is phenomenal. It is the reason why their small towns are going to survive in their region, because they've really partnered with the business interests to do that. Again, we at the federal level are realizing that we can't afford to just spread money all over the place, not talking to each other, which is what we've been doing for the last generation. And so we have to become much more efficient. And that's part of the reason why we're funding all these scenario planning exercises. And then we have to make sure that we are thinking about the people in our communities and making our communities as affordable as possible. And I'm not going to go into the mapping here, but I think that one of the things that comes from another part of HUD, the Federal Housing Administration, we now own about a third of the real estate housing funds. We are very concerned about risk. The drive until you qualify suburbs are now emerging as some of the riskiest investments in America. And so we have to start paying attention to these issues from all different kinds of reasons. So I'll stop there. I know we're short on time, but it's been an amazing experience, and it's just fantastic to see these examples from South Florida, from El Paso, that are, you know, illustrations of what we're trying to support. So thank you.
Thank you, Shelley. Let's get a couple questions. Who's got one? Burning question for Shelley. Or Mike. I have one for these guys. If it were not for the existence and the cash of the Department of Defense Office of Economic Adjustment giving you grant money with which to do the plan you just did, would it be done right now?
No.
If it were not for the Office of Sustainable Communities giving the 7 counties of Southeast Florida the money to do the plan you're undertaking now, would you be doing it?
No.
Okay. So I think that answers your question about whether the federal government has an important role in this stuff. We know it does,
Yes.
because we know that this work would still be on the to-do list and not underway or being completed. And so that struck me. Anybody else? Okay, we'll go that way. Yes, on the second row.
Yes, we're right now we're doing over the next 6 months we're doing an implementation matrix so that we can track not only are the projects getting done as part of the sort of the recommended things, but what the value added to the city is. As a quick example, one of the things that's recommended in the work that Kohl did for us was you should really change your land use patterns around the BRT system that's going to connect your downtown to 2 hospitals and a university. It was announced today that there will be a $100 million trolley system that runs from downtown El Paso up along that corridor, and then the economic impact of that based on the kind of land use planning that we're talking about is in the billions of dollars. And so, yeah, that's part of the work that we're doing, and the return on it is, it's a no-brainer when you compare the development types.
Third row. Please.
About that? Thank you. That's really, it's great that you say this everywhere we go. So a couple of things. I've told some folks in the hall, your attitude is not universal. And there are many, many people who feel that it's not appropriate for the federal government to be involved in this work. And some of that is because generally the federal government is actually kind of good at funding the construction of stuff, buildings or bridges or whatever. But there's an assumption that locals can pull together the money to do the preliminary work, right? And I think that in this, you know, the difference now is that in this economic downturn, actually municipal budgets are completely fried. So there is no money to do the thinking about how to get a return on investment, how to line up different projects that might be one-off, but when put together or thought in tandem, they actually deliver a larger set of benefits. And so that's been a really helpful argument. It's almost like, you know, we're funding the pre-development phase for communities, and that kind of terminology actually kind of helps. Because planning, not so loved in the halls of D.C.
I'm going to stop us because we hit the time limit, but I did want to mention the Ransom West Virginia project that Shelley brought up. There's a huge amount of information and positive news about that Susan Henderson, who's right back there and is one of the experts on it, and she can answer questions about that one as well. Thank you all very much for coming.